The hidden season. Listen carefully. This message is not random, and it is not arriving late. It is arriving precisely when your soul has reached the point where confusion can no longer contain the truth. You have felt it for years now, that quiet separation from the world, that unspoken distance between you and others. You walk into rooms and feel unseen, misunderstood, or strangely isolated, even when surrounded by people. Conversations feel shallow, relationships feel temporary, and somewhere deep inside, you have asked the question you never say out loud: why am I always alone? What if your loneliness was not rejection but protection? What if the silence around you was not absence but concealment? What if God did not hide you because you were weak, but because what you carry is too dangerous to be exposed prematurely? Chosen one, there are individuals whose spiritual capacity, psychological depth, and energetic authority cannot be introduced to the world too early. Not because they are fragile, but because they are powerful. Power attracts opposition. Power provokes envy. Power awakens resistance. And so, before the public unveiling, there is always a hidden season. This is the season where your character is refined without applause, where your discernment sharpens in solitude, and where you learn to hear truth without noise and direction without validation. In this season, you are taught restraint before influence, humility before recognition, and silence before authority. Many people want visibility, but they are not prepared for the weight that visibility brings. Exposure without foundation leads to collapse. Elevation without maturity leads to destruction. So you were held back, not to deny you, but to stabilize you. You were not overlooked, you were covered, you were not forgotten, you were delayed on purpose. The same hand that anointed you also concealed you. The same voice that called you also instructed silence. This is not punishment. This is preparation. While others were building public identities, you were building internal strength. While others were chasing validation, you were being trained in self-governance. While others were distracted by noise, you were being aligned with clarity. That isolation you felt was not emptiness, it was insulation. You were insulated from distractions that would have diluted your focus, from relationships that would have drained your energy, and from environments that would have corrupted your integrity. Every unanswered call, every door that didn't open, and every relationship that faded was part of a divine filtration process. Only what aligns with your assignment will be allowed to follow you into the next phase. And make no mistake, the hidden season does not last forever. Concealment always precedes revelation. Roots grow in darkness before they break through the surface. When you emerge, it will not be loud, rushed, or chaotic. It will be grounded, undeniable, and irreversible. You will not need to announce yourself. Your presence will speak. If this resonates, pause for a moment. Comment, "I am chosen," below, like this message. Subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but as a declaration that you recognize yourself in the truth. Now, let's dive deeper. Point 1. Why God hid you from people who couldn't handle you. There are levels of insight, authority, and presence that destabilize unprepared minds, and you carry them without effort. When you walk into a space, you don't merely arrive as a person. You arrive as a shift. The atmosphere tightens. Conversations lose their ease. People become aware of themselves in ways they did not consent to. Masks slip, not because you expose them deliberately, but because your stillness removes the noise they hide behind. In your presence, insecurities rise to the surface. Unresolved thoughts begin to ache, and unexamined lives feel suddenly too loud. Even when you say nothing, something about you interrupts the illusion, and that interruption is uncomfortable for those who rely on it to feel safe. This is why your path has never been crowded. This is why access to you has always been limited. God hides what others would mishandle. You were not hidden because you lacked value, clarity, or power. You were hidden because your depth would have been misused by shallow hands, your sincerity drained by people who only know how to take, and your insight reduced to entertainment by those unwilling to transform. Some people don't want truth. They want familiarity. They want reflections that confirm who they already are, not revelations that demand who they must become. Your presence does not soothe false identities, it challenges them, and not everyone survives that encounter with their ego intact. Had you been visible too early, your gifts would have been consumed without gratitude, your compassion exploited without restraint, and your wisdom turned into a tool for agendas that were never aligned with your spirit. You would have been praised publicly while being emptied privately. You would have been needed, but never protected. So God placed you in obscurity, not to shrink you, but to preserve you. The silence was intentional. The delays were strategic. The loneliness was not abandonment. It was insulation. In the hidden seasons, your discernment sharpened, your boundaries formed, and your strength matured without the pressure of performance. You learned to stand without applause, to see without validation, and to trust without evidence. This is why, when the time comes for you to be seen, you will not be dazzled by attention or weakened by approval. You will arrive whole. You will arrive anchored. And those who encounter you then will feel it even more deeply, not as discomfort but as gravity, because what was once hidden has finally been properly prepared. Point 2. Loneliness as divine isolation, not rejection. Isolation is the womb of transformation, and this truth has echoed through every serious spiritual lineage across history. No life of lasting impact was forged in constant noise, applause, or comfort. Moses was removed from Egypt and hidden in Midian, not as punishment, but as preparation. David was separated from society and placed among sheep, where no one was watching, where no validation existed, and where character could be formed without interference. Jesus withdrew into solitude before his public ministry, not because he was weak, but because power must first be stabilized in silence before it can be carried in public. Before impact comes invisibility, and invisibility is never accidental. It is the protective covering over something that is still forming. Your loneliness was not a mistake. It was a mechanism. It forced you inward when the world could no longer distract you. When external affirmation disappeared, you were left alone with your thoughts, your patterns, your fears, and your calling. This stripping was deliberate. It refined your discernment. You learned who you were without an audience. You learned what mattered when nothing could entertain you. You learned how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. While others were building social circles, chasing validation, and negotiating their identity through the opinions of others, you were building internal clarity. You were learning how to hear God without external noise. Silence trained your perception. Solitude strengthened your spiritual muscles. The delay sharpened your alignment. What felt like stagnation was actually restructuring. What felt like being left behind was actually being held back for protection. Premature exposure would have damaged what you were still developing. Depth was required before reach. Emotional regulation before responsibility. inner authority before outward leadership. This phase was not meant to elevate your visibility. It was meant to increase your capacity to stand alone without resentment, capacity to lead without ego, capacity to move without needing applause. The isolation revealed truth. It showed you which connections were based on convenience and which were rooted in alignment. You didn't lose people. You outgrew frequencies. Some relationships could not survive the version of you that required silence, boundaries, and depth. That was not loss. That was recalibration. And now, what emerges from this solitude is not someone desperate to be seen, but someone stable enough to be trusted with influence. Point 3. Why your identity had to remain undefined. Chosen ones often feel fragmented early in life, as if they were never meant to fit cleanly into one label or identity, because you were not designed for containment. You were too deep for casual crowds that survive on noise and surface-level exchanges, too aware for ignorance that demands sleepwalking compliance, too sensitive for brutality that normalizes cruelty, and too strong for systems that rely on control rather than truth. This inner contradiction created confusion, but it also created camouflage. That identity ambiguity was not a flaw or a delay. It was intentional. If your role had been clearly defined too early, opposition would have known exactly where to aim. Labels attract attention. Clarity invites interference. Exposure before readiness destroys potential. So instead, God allowed you to remain undefined, untraceable, and difficult to categorize. You move through life without a clear box, because boxes are easy to monitor. You learn to exist between worlds, understanding many perspectives while belonging fully to none. This protected you while your inner architecture was being built. During that season, you were learning who you are without applause, without validation, without permission. You were forced inward. You developed discernment instead of dependence, intuition instead of instruction, and inner authority instead of borrowed confidence. While others were being shaped by approval, you were being shaped by pressure. While others relied on external mirrors to know themselves, you were taught to see in the dark. This is why your growth often felt lonely and disorienting. You were forming roots before revealing fruit. The silence trained you to hear truth without distortion. The isolation trained you to stand without reinforcement. The lack of labels kept you fluid, adaptive, and impossible to trap. Many chosen ones mistake this phase as being lost, when in reality it is the final protection before precision. Fragmentation was not confusion, it was distribution. Pieces of you were placed across experiences so no single blow could destroy the whole. And now, as integration begins, those pieces are returning with wisdom, strength, and clarity. What once felt like not belonging is revealing itself as sovereignty. What once felt like being undefined is becoming divine specificity. You were never meant to be easily understood, easily followed, or easily claimed. You were meant to be forged quietly, recognized late, and activated fully. Nothing about your early ambiguity was accidental. It was the shield that allowed your true identity to survive until the moment it could stand on its own, without needing to be explained. Point 4. The dangerous power you carry. Chosen. One often feels fragmented early in life, as if they were never meant to fit cleanly into one label or identity, because you were not designed for containment. You were too deep for casual crowds that survive on noise and surface-level exchanges, too aware for ignorance that demands sleepwalking compliance, too sensitive for brutality that normalizes cruelty, and too strong for systems that rely on control rather than truth. This inner contradiction created confusion, but it also created camouflage. That identity ambiguity was not a flaw or a delay. It was intentional. If your role had been clearly defined too early, the opposition would have known exactly where to aim. Labels attract attention. Clarity invites interference. Exposure before readiness destroys potential. So instead, God allowed you to remain undefined, untraceable, and difficult to categorize. You moved through life without a clear box, because boxes are easy to monitor. You learned to exist between worlds, understanding many perspectives while belonging fully to none. This protected you while your inner architecture was being built. During that season, you were learning who you are without applause, without validation, and without permission. You were forced inward. You developed discernment instead of dependence, intuition instead of instruction, and inner authority instead of borrowed confidence. While others were being shaped by approval, you were being shaped by pressure. While others relied on external mirrors to know themselves, you were taught to see in the dark. This is why your growth often felt lonely and disorienting. You were forming roots before revealing fruit. The silence trained you to hear truth without distortion. The isolation trained you to stand without reinforcement. The lack of labels kept you fluid, adaptive, and impossible to trap. Many chosen ones mistake this phase as being lost, when in reality it is the final protection before precision. Fragmentation was not confusion, it was distribution. Pieces of you were placed across experiences, so no single blow could destroy the whole. And now, as integration begins, those pieces are returning with wisdom, strength, and clarity. What once felt like not belonging is revealing itself as sovereignty. What once felt like being undefined is becoming divine specificity. You were never meant to be easily understood, easily followed, or easily claimed. You were meant to be forged quietly, recognized late, and activated fully. Nothing about your early ambiguity was accidental. It was the shield that allowed your true identity to survive until the moment it could stand on its own without needing to be explained. Point 5. Why betrayal was part of the covering. Some of the deepest wounds you experienced were not accidents. Betrayal forced detachment. It broke emotional dependencies. It taught you discernment. What felt like abandonment was actually exposure, a moment where truth stepped forward without asking permission. When loyalty was tested, illusions collapsed. You saw who stayed out of convenience and who vanished when growth demanded more of them. That fracture hurt because it severed emotional habits you mistook for love. But pain has a way of clarifying what comfort never could. If everyone had stayed, you might have stayed small. You might have kept shrinking yourself to remain acceptable, tolerable, and familiar. You would have continued explaining yourself to people who only understood the version of you that benefited them. Growth threatens attachments built on dependency, and when you began to change, the structure around you could no longer hold. God allowed separation so you wouldn't confuse familiarity with alignment. Familiarity keeps you loyal to patterns. Alignment moves you toward purpose. There is a difference between being known and being understood, between being surrounded and being supported. The loss stripped you down, but it also returned you to yourself. In the silence that followed, you learned to hear your own voice without interference. You learned to stand without leaning. You learned that discernment is not judgment. It is wisdom earned through experience. The wounds refined your boundaries. They taught you when to open and when to withdraw, when to speak, and when to observe. Detachment was not coldness. It was clarity. It taught you that not everyone who walks with you is meant to arrive with you. Some people are chapters, not conclusions. The separation was surgical, not cruel. It removed what would have limited your reach. You were not being punished. You were being prepared. Prepared to lead without needing approval. Prepared to love without losing yourself. Prepared to move forward without dragging old expectations behind you. What broke you also freed you. What left you made room. And what felt like loss was actually alignment taking shape. Nothing about this process was wasted. Every wound carried instruction. Every ending carved space for expansion. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are standing where familiarity could no longer follow, and purpose finally could. Point 6. The internal rewiring of the hidden season. While nothing appeared to move on the outside, everything was being recalibrated within you. Your tolerance for distractions, manipulation, and meaningless noise quietly dissolved. Your intuition became sharper, not louder. Your patience matured into discernment. Your self-respect stopped asking for permission and began setting boundaries without explanation. This season was never designed to reward performance or visibility. It was designed to expand capacity. Capacity to lead without needing control. Capacity to love without attachment or fear of loss. Capacity to speak truth without aggression, hesitation, or the need to be understood. You were being trained to hold weight, emotional, spiritual, psychological, without collapsing under it. Point 7. Why your return will confuse people. When you re-emerge, people will say you changed, but that's not accurate. You clarified. The version of you they remember was still fragmented, still accommodating, still negotiable. This version is integrated. Your presence will feel calm but authoritative, quiet but immovable. You won't announce growth. You won't explain boundaries. And those who once overlooked you will feel unsettled, not because you seek power, but because you no longer require validation. If this message spoke to you, comment, "I am chosen." Carry this awareness with humility. Walk forward without explanation. Your life will speak for you. The hidden are always revealed at the appointed time, and that time is approaching.